Ever since April 2026, pulling up to a petrol pump in India means getting one specific product, whether you asked for it or not. The option to choose your fuel blend is gone. E20 is now the mandatory national standard, with no alternatives or discounts available.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into India's massive E20 fuel mandate. Now, this is a classic, fascinating case of macro-level policy clashing head-on with micro-level reality. On one hand, the government is scoring these huge economic and environmental wins on the world stage. But on the other, well, everyday drivers are stuck dealing with the granular, highly technical fallout right under the hood of their cars. So we're going to impartially break down the data, question the mechanical realities of this rollout, and see exactly who is paying the price for energy independence. Let's get right into it.
Okay, here's how we're going to tackle this today. First, we'll look at the E20 mandate itself, then check out those big macroeconomic gains. After that, we'll get into the actual technical reality of ethanol, the consumer backlash we're seeing, that tricky auto insurance trap you absolutely need to know about, and finally, what the road ahead looks like. Let's kick things off with Section 1, India's E20 mandate, and what is truly a historic rollout. To really grasp the scale of this policy, you have to look at this number. 1.84 lakh crore rupees. That is absolutely staggering. It's the amount of foreign exchange savings the government has generated since ramping up the ethanol blending program. You see, when a country relies on importing over 85% of its crude oil, the entire economy is incredibly vulnerable to global price shocks. So this giant pile of saved cash, that's the main economic engine driving the government's aggressive push for this mandate. But before we get too deep into the weeds, let's make sure we're on the exact same page. What actually is E20? Well, it simply means the fuel you're pumping is a mixture of 20% ethanol, which is a type of alcohol usually made from sugarcane or maize, and 80% regular petrol. This blend has rapidly replaced the older E5 and E10 blends at almost 90,000 fuel stations across the country. For most of us pulling up to a pump today, E20 is the new normal, and in a lot of places, it's literally the only option available. Moving right along to Section 2, the macroeconomic gains, where we see some massive national policy wins. Now, the government robustly defends this program, and honestly, when you zoom out, they have some serious bragging rights here. I mean, they hit their 20% blending target in December 2025. That is 5 whole years ahead of schedule. On the environmental front, they cite a massive drop of 736 lakh metric tons of CO2 emissions. Economically, they've offset huge amounts of crude imports and projected a transformative 40,000 crore rupee income boost for farmers in 2025 alone. Plus, ethanol actually has a higher octane rating, sitting at around 108.5, which helps prevent engine knocking in modern cars. And you can see that institutional backing right here. Reports like this one from Infomark's ratings confirm that this is a huge structural win at the national level. Instead of sending billions of dollars overseas to buy foreign oil, the money spent procuring sugarcane and maize for ethanol is going straight into the pockets of Indian farmers. So from a high-level energy sovereignty standpoint, the success is crystal clear. But, and this is a very big but, let's pivot to Section 3, the technical reality of ethanol versus old engines. Because here's the thing, national wins don't always play nice with the hardware sitting in your driveway. Let's look at the chemistry for a second. While ethanol has that great high-octane rating we just talked about, it actually packs about 30 to 35% less energy density than pure petrol. Mathematically, that means your engine literally has to burn more fuel just to travel the exact same distance. Sure, you could go out of your way to find pure unblended petrol, like XP100, but you're going to pay a massive premium, up to 165 rupees a liter in some areas. That's just not feasible for the average daily commuter. And that drop in efficiency builds into a very real mechanical nightmare. You see, ethanol is highly hygroscopic. That's just a fancy scientific way of saying it loves to drink water right out of the air. So if your car sits idle for a couple of weeks, that absorbed moisture actually separates from the petrol and pools at the bottom of your tank. Over time, that trapped water causes rust inside metal tanks and fuel lines. Worse yet, if you're driving a pre-2023 car that wasn't specifically built for this, the ethanol slowly hardens, shrinks, and eats away at your older rubber hoses, seals, and gaskets. Which brings us to Section 4, consumer backlash, surveys, and growing public anger. Timeline creates a rigid mechanical divide. If your car or bike rolled off the assembly line after April 2023, its engine was engineered to burn this exact 20% blend. If it was built before then, the hardware is incompatible with what is now flowing out of the pumps. The government achieved this nationwide energy transition a full 5 years ahead of schedule. It is a massive logistical feat, but it permanently traps hundreds of millions of older cars in a fueling ecosystem they were never built to survive. To understand why the state pushed so hard for this, we have to look at India's energy vulnerability. The country imports roughly 85% of its crude oil. Every time global markets twitch, the domestic economy absorbs the shockwave. Blending ethanol directly cuts that dependency. By replacing a fraction of crude with locally grown fuel, the government has saved an estimated 1.84 lakh crore rupees in foreign exchange, keeping 302 lakh metric tons of imported oil off the national books entirely. The domestic ripple effects are just as large. The E20 mandate has prevented over 54 million tons of carbon emissions from hitting the atmosphere, all while funneling a massive new income stream directly to local sugarcane and grain farmers. On a national scale, this is a clear victory for energy security and environmental policy. But when we zoom in from the macroeconomic level down to the individual citizen, the ledger becomes dangerously unbalanced. The trouble starts with basic physics. Ethanol simply holds less energy per drop than pure petrol. When you force a 20% mix into an engine calibrated for pure fuel, the math is unforgiving. A measurable drop in your vehicle's mileage is guaranteed.
The public's reaction shouldn't be much of a surprise. Check this out. A recent wide-scale survey by local circles found that over half of all petrol vehicle owners, 53% to be exact, think the current E20 rollout is either completely ineffective or straight-up disastrous. There is a massive disconnect here between the macroeconomic celebrations in Parliament and the microeconomic reality of driving to work.
And when we dig into the specific data, it's pretty revealing. Among folks driving older, pre-2023 vehicles, a whopping 66% are reporting a noticeable mileage drop of over 10%. On top of that, 45% say they're suddenly dealing with increased wear and tear or having to shell out for direct repairs. Essentially, everyday drivers are paying the exact same price at the fuel pump, but they're getting fewer kilometers and footing the bill for extra maintenance.
Chemistry. Ethanol is hygroscopic, meaning it actively absorbs moisture from the air. Even worse, it acts as an industrial solvent. Inside older fuel lines, it aggressively swells, hardens, and cracks rubber hoses and plastic gaskets that were only meant to handle petrol. Older carburetor-based vehicles suffer the most. The presence of ethanol forces them to run a lean air-fuel mixtrum, starving the engine of power, creating rough idling, and causing frustrating stalls in the middle of traffic. For the average driver, the only technical escape route is to hunt down pure IOC XP100 petrol. But at over 150 rupees per liter, relying on that premium option is a mathematical impossibility for a daily commute. This leaves millions of Indians stuck pumping a chemical solvent into their cars, quietly degrading their engines from the inside out and accelerating the path toward mechanical failure. This chart shows consumer blowback captured by local circles. 53% rate the rollout disastrous, and 66% report a mileage drop over 10%. It also tracks mechanical impacts, showing 45% of older car owners hitting spikes in unusual wear and tear or repair costs. Online forums are packed with videos from frustrated taxpayers who paid their road taxes and fuel duties in full, only to find their cars dead in the workshop just months after the mandate took over. The fuel is safe? Yet, during a recent Supreme Court hearing, the Attorney General referred to the E20 mandate as an experiment, stating that the true results and long-term impacts will only become clear next year. If your engine does fail, don't count on your insurance. Because ethanol corrosion happens slowly, surveyors classify the melted fuel lines as general wear and tear. Standard policies outright reject those claims, leaving you holding the entire repair bill. That quiet frustration has boiled over into physical protests. Motorists recently gathered at Delhi's Jantar Mantar to demand back their right to choose their fuel, the release of technical safety reports from the state, and financial compensation for the damage done to their vehicles. As State Minister Priyank Kharge pointed out during the backlash, the state shouldn't challenge citizens to prove mechanical damage while its own official safety data remains pending. The mandate is actually expanding. In May 2026, the Bureau of Indian Standards laid down the official technical specifications for E22 all the way through E30 fuel blends. The government has even introduced E85, an 85% ethanol mix that is significantly cheaper and burns cleaner. But right now, it is practically stranded at a few localized pilot pumps in major sugarcane-producing states. The market is currently locked.
Manufacturers won't mass-produce flex-fuel vehicles without a dense network of E85 pumps, and retailers won't stock the fuel without a critical mass of vehicles to buy it. While policymakers aggressively engineer a future defined by these higher blends, there is absolutely no policy, retrofit framework, or financial protection for the hundreds of millions of pre-2023 cars currently navigating this transition. If you own a pre-2023 vehicle, you need to play defense. Get your fuel systems, injector O-rings, and tank seals inspected at an authorized center immediately. And start manually tracking your exact tank-to-tank mileage so you can catch early signs of degradation. Keep your fuel tank reasonably full to limit the amount of empty airspace, which fights the ethanol's tendency to absorb atmospheric moisture. You should also consult your mechanic about ethanol-compatible fuel additives to protect sensitive components. If you're in the market for a new or used car, demand explicit, documented proof of E20 or flex fuel compliance before signing any paperwork. The government saved 1.84 lakh crore rupees in foreign exchange. Meanwhile, your older vehicle burns more fuel, requires more repairs, and costs more per kilometer to run. Who absorbed the real cost of this transition?
Trap, and why so many claims are actively being rejected.
So you've got damaged fuel lines, you go to the mechanic, and you think, hey, my insurance will cover this, right? Well, take a look at the bottom two rows of this table. Because E20 damage, like those hardening rubber seals or rust from water separation, happens gradually over time. Insurance companies universally categorize it as natural wear and tear. Standard comprehensive policies, they only cover sudden accidental damage. And even if you paid extra for an expensive Engine Protect add-on, those are meant for sudden water ingress like floods, not slow chemical corrosion. Auto portals like Axio and Car and Bike are reporting that claims for E20-related damage on older cars are actively being denied. It's a massive financial loophole.
So how do you protect yourself? Well, the government says just using E20 won't instantly void your overarching warranty, but experts are urging serious caution. First things first, check your manual. If your pre-2023 car isn't officially E20 compliant, you need to get it serviced regularly to check those vulnerable rubber seals. Crucially, do not leave E20 sitting in an idle gas tank for weeks. That is exactly how you get that nasty water absorption. And please, keep a really strict paperwork trail of all your fuel receipts and service records. You will absolutely need them if you ever have to fight a claim.
Finally, let's move to Section 6, the road ahead and the future of E20 policy. Looking at this timeline, the government is absolutely putting the pedal to the metal. Since they already hit that E20 target early, they are actively laying the legal groundwork for even higher blends. The Bureau of Indian Standards has already published specs for E22 to E30 blends. And Union Minister Nitin Gadkari has even cleared regulations authorizing 100% ethanol, E100, for future flex fuel vehicles. The shift is happening, and it's happening fast. But industry experts are waving a yellow flag here, pushing for a much more calibrated transition. If the state expects everyday consumers to willingly pump even higher blends like E30 into their cars, they absolutely have to address that energy density problem. Analysts are saying this will require highly competitive pricing. We're talking targeted tax exemptions, kind of like the recent excise duty waiver on E22 to E30 blends, just to financially make up for the fact that you're buying fuel that fundamentally gives you way less energy per liter. And that brings us to the core tension of this entire policy, and a really important question. The state has saved 1.84 lakh crore rupees, secured national energy independence, and pumped massive amounts of money into the rural economy. But at the exact same time, everyday citizens with older cars are forced to pay the same price for lower mileage, all while absorbing the out-of-pocket costs of engine damage that their insurance simply refuses to cover. So, with all that in mind, who is really absorbing the true cost of our energy sovereignty? I'll leave you with that to ponder. Thanks for joining this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.